Hello, and welcome to another Skylines II video. Now today's video is going to be a little different, as today we are going to be running the new benchmark in Skylines II. Now this first benchmark I believe is on high settings. I believe everything is cranked to the max, except I believe ambient occultation and the fact that I have NVIDIA DLSS on. Now this first benchmark is going to take a while, so I will speed it up. Alright, so these are the concluded results from the benchmark. Now, if you don't know what a benchmark is essentially a test on your computer to see what it can do and how good it is. Now, as we can see in my benchmark, I got an average of 40 FPS, which is a little low, actually pretty low, when you compare it to other games. But at the same time, Skylines II is notorious for not being well optimized, which, speaking of, I do think in the future I will continue to make more of these benchmarks, especially as we know Iceflake Studio has been increasingly just talking about making the game faster and run better, and actively doing it too. Anyways, back to the specs, we can see that the amount of frames I have, that's the amount of frames in total, which is how FPS is calculated. FPS is calculated by taking the amount of frames in a minute and dividing it by 60. So I got 3,492 frames, which is a good amount, I think, for how long the benchmark was, on the graphics preset of hot. Again, it's worth noting that I am using NVIDIA DLSS, and ambient occultation is off. I believe that was something that Iceflake Studio did as a default, and changed on everyone's device when they made, I believe, their first patch, actually. Now, as far as the specs of my computer, I have a Ryzen 7 9800X 3D, which is arguably a very, very good processor, and I have a NVIDIA RTX 4070 Ti, also a pretty high-end graphics card. Now, the CPU is actually what basically gives the commands to the graphics card, and then the graphics card actually makes it happen. Now, those are the main important specs in this test. And if you look, you can see that there is something that says GPU bound. Now what this means is basically how long the CPU had to wait to give instructions to the GPU, meaning that the GPU was holding up the CPU from giving instructions. Now, this I believe is something that is inherently going to be higher, especially on any system that has a AMD X3D chip. This is because it can store more instructions before giving them, so I do think that it's fine. Now, something else worth noting is the fact that I was also recording, and I'm sure that it would be better if you weren't. Another mention, these are still decently good numbers, and I do hope that we see Iceflake Studio only continue to improve on this. Now, as far as anything else on this graph, you really don't have to worry about, because the mainly important thing is the graphics preset and how many frames you get. That's all that matters when benchmarking. Coming up right here, you can see another result from a benchmark. This time, though, the resolution was in 1080p, and the graphics were set to medium this time. Again, we can see that we got a lot more frames, which is going to happen once you lower the settings and resolution, and the average FPS was actually much higher. Again, we see that the GPU bound also went down, which is also another factor that happens because you're giving the GPU less work to do. Now, I finished running the benchmark on 1080p in low settings, and again we saw that the average FPS increased by about 30. Of course, more frames were rendered, and again we're seeing that the GPU bottleneck is decreasing every single time. At this time, I do want to take just a moment to say how good Iceflake Studio especially is doing. I mean, to begin with, their transparency has been huge, and that's proven by the benchmark. Additionally, they've actually been making changes or shown that they are planning on it. This is again proved by the recent 50GB update because of how many things at the smallest level they had to change to make the game run right. And again, we do have to understand that this game will probably never run like other games. As we know, since release there's been problems all across the board. Whether it be people not having the best of the best hardware, or the game just doing more than it has to do with rendering or whatever it is. Iceflake Studios adding the benchmark is a huge sign that they plan on fixing the problem. I mean, they're going to take this information and optimize the game better. And again, take a moment to think about how complex this game is. This game is doing constant calculations and constant rendering for where people go, what things look like, and just how the game runs. So when you think about that for just a moment, you realize, wow, the fact that it can do what it already does is pretty crazy. And again, the one last thing you have to remember, this isn't a competitive shooter like Fortnite or Call of Duty. You don't need 200 FPS. You need a solid 60 FPS to run the game smoothly. And really, they're getting there. And especially if they fix things on the CPU level, which is how many people are in the city, and when it starts to slow down, I think we're really going to see a comeback in the game. And then from there, they're probably just going to continue improving the game. With all that kindness out the way, I do urge Iceflake Studios to fix their benchmark. Now, I'm sure some of these problems were intentional, such as the traffic jam that we saw on the benchmark, and while other things, though, I doubt were intentional. I mean, you can see in the background here, there's just missing connections for power lines. And I think there's countless examples of pointless roads and interchanges. But again, I do have to say, the city does look pretty cool. The last thing I would like to say is maybe make some of the information about the city available. I mean, knowing the population, especially because they acknowledge the fact that the CPU problems and the performance problems do scale with population, population would be a really huge factor to know. Also, if possible, maybe with their new update to Paradox mods, and because they have their own modding platform, it might make sense to just allow people to download the city and look into it more, because I do want to know about the population, I do maybe want to check out some traffic flow, and maybe they should address whether there are a few intentional problems in the city. With that said though, the benchmark feature is a really great feature, and if they keep adding more features like this to promote transparency, and just to explain problems with the game so we can learn, I think we're moving in a great direction with the game. Anyways, that's the end of this video, and I really want to thank you for watching through the whole thing. It really means a lot. In the meantime, if you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them down below, and have yourself a great day.